There is a line from Dr. Seuss's The Lorax that carries a surprising amount of spiritual weight and significance for John's letter this morning. Here's a video clip.
Which way does a tree fall?
Down?
A tree falls the way it leans. Be careful which way you lean.
A tree falls the way it leans. Be careful which way you lean. If you watch a tree over time, it doesn't just crash to the ground on a out-of-nowhere calm day. It falls because years by years, bit by bit, season by season, it has leaned a certain direction. And its roots have been accustomed to the tilt of the tree. So when a storm finally hits it, nature simply finishes what the habitat started. We do not live in a vacuum. We live in a culture that has its own rhythms and its own pressures. Now, culture is not necessarily the adversary, but it is an atmosphere we must acknowledge. Because without realizing it, we lean into culture. The hyper-productivity of the world, the cynicism of online discourse, the consumer impulse to measure our worth by what it is we acquire. We tilt toward values that are not holy and that might not be just. The question isn't whether culture shapes us, because it undeniably does. The question is, which way will we lean? And as followers of Jesus, how do we hold to the beautiful invitation of God without losing our footing? I don't believe culture is something we need to fear or we need to fight. It is the very soil we are planted in, and it is the neighbors we are called to love. Culture will nudge you towards self-preservation and outrage and apathy. And instead, we are invited to tilt towards vulnerability and unity and never let the noise of culture drown out the quiet whisper of God's grace. And if we aren't paying close enough attention, we can lean away from the love of God, not out of malice, but simply out of momentum. So how do we stay anchored in this love of Christ for the world around us? Well, to answer that, we're going to turn to the very shortest letter in the entire New Testament. It's written on a single sheet of papyrus. It's less than 300 words in the original Greek. The letter of 2 John comes to us from a man who knew what it meant to stand firm when everything else was leaning away. Now, by the time John pens these words, somewhere between 85 and 95 AD, he is an old man. He's probably between his 80s and 90s at this point, which in antiquity is a long age. Think about his time frame. He was a young man in 30 AD when he left his fishing nets to follow this guy named Jesus. He sat in the inner circle. He stood at the foot of the cross. He lived through the terrible destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. And now it's 20 years after that. He's likely the very last surviving apostle. And so he writes to a very respected woman in the Ephesus community whose house was the home base for all the church activities. And John knew her. He loved her family, and in his wise, sage way, John writes to give her discipleship advice on how to live in their world. For us, we'd call it a master class in discipleship. So in verse 6, if you're going to give the simplest, most direct definition of Christian living, John writes this: "And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments." That's it. It's no complex philosophy. There's no hidden ministry. Just walk. Just any walking. I mean, not any walking, right? We get what he's talking about here, right? Not walking at the mall. This is something a little deeper. The commandment of John, as received from the beginning when Jesus called him on the shores of Galilee, was to love God and love people. That's how we walk steadily in the world. And then John turns to address the crisis that's unfolding, a crisis that he's struggling with. In the ancient Roman world, traveling teachers were everywhere. Now, here's the modern analogy. In the 50s, we'd call them vacuum salesmen. In the 90s, we'd call them magazine salesmen. Today, solar salesmen that come to your door. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. These are traveling teachers. And while the roads were maintained by Rome, the hotels were not. Inns were notoriously filthy. They're absolutely dangerous, most likely morally corrupt. So when Christian missionaries arrived in town, they looked to the locals to help house them and feed them and support them. But deceivers had gone into the world, teachers of Christianity that denied Jesus Christ had come at all. And so John gives this absolutely radical command in verse 10. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. I don't know about you, but that feels a little harsh to me. It doesn't really feel like the Jesus I read about who opened his hearts to everybody. It feels like John is kind of pulling back the invitation. I mean, not to you people, right? But the reality is, in the ancient world, hosting a teacher in your home gave a public endorsement of their message. And so John is telling this faithful woman, if you let false teachers into your living room, you participate in the work. But what happens next in the text is what's so critically important. Because I don't read John telling us to then hurl condemnations at them. I don't read John saying we should shut out any empathy we have. Notice John doesn't ask us to hate them or vilify them or dehumanize them, anyone whose theology is different from ours. He reminds us healthy love requires healthy boundaries. We can recognize the sacred worth of every traveling teacher as a child of God, or every solar person who comes to our door as a child of God, while simultaneously staying rooted in our framework of justice and grace, our framework that has remained an invitation to the world. I'm a third generation United Methodist, so it's part of who I am as a person. But I choose to be United Methodist because of our Wesleyan theology, because it allows people to come to a place and be seen and welcomed and included, and most importantly, it allows someone to change. It allows someone to embrace a different experience with the risen Christ than maybe one they grew up with. It allows someone to see the ways our world is unjust and hurtful and work for a different way forward. It allows for someone to explore questions and ideas without the fear of repercussions or expulsion from the community. We can refuse to validate a harmful message and not reject the person. That's what keeps us grounded and authentic and real. John knew that boundaries were important, but they are built on relationships. And so you see, suddenly he shifts just 2 verses later to say, though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. John is saying letters are not enough. Cards are not enough. Phone calls are not enough. I miss you. I want to sit at the table with you. I want to see you face to face. Now, we know John never made it back to that community. Maybe he was in prison. Maybe he was exiled to the island of Patmos at this point. He would finish his writing and he will die in just a few years. But the message of the invitation survived, leaving us as the bearers of that invitation from Jesus to the world today. A week ago, we had Culture Day here at First United Methodist Church. This is a day for our staff when we kind of step out of our normal routines to focus on building connections and creating a healthy culture that deploys the First United Methodist Church mission, your mission, forward. So all the staff got on a bus and we went north to Erie, Colorado, to a sanctuary farm. Now, the idea behind this farm is that it is a place for animals that would previously have been sent to slaughter. It is a refuge for farm animals. And one of the core frameworks of the farm is that every animal has the right of choice. So the goats and the cows and the peacocks we encountered had the invitation to connect with us, but they could also just keep moving right along. There was a horse that kind of came up to us, checked us all out, smelled us, and then just gingerly walked away. There are pigs that you offer your hand to them. They will boop it with their nose, which is the invitation to scratch the ears. And if you could scratch the ears, they would roll over, and it was all belly time for them. The goats, it wasn't really an invitation. It was an expectation to be loved when we encountered them. I would say, though, it was the donkeys, though, who were oddly drawn to the same person in our group over and over and over again. Just saying, I don't know what to make of that. The sanctuary farm wasn't a day away. It was the living picture of how we are supposed to be the community of God. It was what John is writing us. The door is open. The space is safe. Every being is honored with a genuine, unforced choice. No manipulation. No coercion, just an open hand, an open heart, an invitation. This is the rhythm of the church. We do not force faith, nor do we compromise our truths to draw a crowd in. Instead, we simply offer the holy refuge. We extend a place, a seat for anyone who enters this, an invitation to community, relationship, and to walk with the living God. So as you walk out of these doors today, may you be a people who resist the leans of the world. May you continually extend the radical, uncompromising, invitational love of Jesus Christ to this weary world. Amen.